The very freedom of Europe itself was at stake. The Crusades were a line drawn against further conquest. The Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, the resulting spread of Christianity, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and ultimately the development of modern civilization itself. All of these things occurred because Europe retained its freedom. These books are over 200 years old, written by Charles Mills in 1821, entitled History of the Crusades for the Recovery and Possession of the Holy Land. At a time when the Crusades were usually treated only as side notes in more comprehensive historic text, Mills dedicates 2 full volumes to telling the story of these historic events in detail. Mills implies that Europe's independence and Christian identity were bound up in the decision to launch the Crusades in order to preserve Europe as a Christian ground. This second edition set was printed in London in 1821 when the population was completely Christian and over 99% native European. You can't help but wonder what he would think if he were to walk through London today, a completely different world where the #1 name for baby boys is Muhammad. Native Britons make up less than 40% of the population, and only 33% of the population now claims Christianity as their religion. Now let's take a look at how this 200-year-old rendition of medieval history compares to the modern spin on the same subject. Hello my friends, and welcome to another episode of Antique Acquisitions. I'm excited to be able to go through these antique texts with you today. Second editions like this are less rare than first editions, but they are still highly desirable among collectors of Crusades history and useful for discussions about early 19th century European views on medieval history. Let's begin with a brief overview of Mills' preface, which he uses to explain the motivations behind the Crusades. He describes the duty of freeing the Holy Sepulchre at Jerusalem from Muslim control as a sacred obligation to medieval Christians. He emphasizes that pilgrimages to Jerusalem were already central to Christian devotion. For centuries, kings and commoners alike had journeyed to the Holy Land in search of penance and spiritual renewal. These pilgrimages created a powerful emotional tie to the sacred places. But over time, stories returned of oppression, with pilgrims being taxed, obstructed, and sometimes insulted, as Mills puts it with characteristic British understatement. The crusading spirit was quickened into action by indignation at insults. Indignation at these wrongs mingled with devotion, and the notion of pilgrimage itself changed. No longer merely an act of personal piety, it became the foundation of collective holy war. But for Mills, this wasn't just about Jerusalem. He insists that the duty extended to preserving Europe as Christian ground. If Christian pilgrims were insulted abroad, if Christian worship was obstructed in the East, it was a warning that Europe itself could face the same fate. Thus, the crusading spirit was also about ensuring that Christians within Europe could continue their faith without living under foreign conquest. Now let's move on to chapter 1. In his first chapter, Mills sets the stage. He traces early crusading dreams back to popes like Sylvester II and Gregory VII, who imagined a great war for Jerusalem long before the First Crusade. He describes a Europe in ceaseless change, kingdoms rising and falling, and dynasties competing for power. Yet even amid this instability, pilgrims still pressed eastward, often enduring danger and hardship to reach the Holy Land. But Mills also underscores a crucial point. Christendom had already endured centuries of Muslim expansion. The Saracens had conquered Spain in the 8th century, pushed into southern France before being checked at Tours in 732 AD by Charles Martel, and seized Sicily along with parts of southern Italy after 75 years of fighting, which ended in 902 AD. In the east, the Seljuk Turks destroyed Byzantine power at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, taking nearly all of Anatolia. As Mills notes, these were not isolated skirmishes, but the common struggles between the Turks and the Latins. This steady tide of conquest weighed heavily on Christian Europe. When news arrived of further indignities in the Holy Land, pilgrims burdened with taxes, restricted from worship, mocked for their faith, it seemed intolerable. Mills reminds us that this oppression gave strength to the spirit of pilgrimizing, fueling determination rather than despair. These wrongs did more than anger the common pilgrim. They became a rallying cry, echoing in the halls of kings and the courts of princes. Noble knights, bound by honor and chivalry, saw in the Crusades not only a defense of sacred ground, but a chance to prove their valor. For monarchs, it was a chance to lead Christendom in righteous battle. What began as the solitary journey of the penitent pilgrim grew into the sworn duty of armies, an armed pilgrimage carried by Europe's rulers and warriors alike. Mills frames this as more than defending Jerusalem's shrines. He emphasizes that the very freedom of Europe itself was at stake. The Crusades were a line drawn against further conquest, ensuring that Europeans could continue to practice Christianity on their own soil without fear of domination or suppression. Mills points to Charlemagne, who centuries earlier had tried to shield Eastern Christians, as proof that the impulse to defend Jerusalem was long-standing. The memory of lost lands, coupled with reports of fresh insults, forged the conviction that something had to be done. Thus, when Pope Urban finally called the First Crusade during the Council of Clermont in 1095, it was not, in Mills' telling, merely a sudden burst of enthusiasm, but rather the culmination of centuries of devotion, grievance, and resistance to Muslim aggression. Some other medieval sources suggest that when the Pope finished his speech, the crowd began to cry out in unison, Deus vult, which means God wills it. God wills it. Mill makes it clear that by the close of the 11th century, Christendom was ready, prepared in spirit and in politics, to march eastward, reclaim the Holy City, and secure Europe's freedom as a Christian homeland. Modern historians might say, but Mills was writing in 1821, and his account reflects the assumptions of his time. He portrays the Crusades as a sacred duty, born of devotion and necessity, with the Muslim world framed almost entirely as the aggressor and oppressor. While acknowledging the deep role of faith, they also see the Crusades as being more complex. Political ambition, dynastic struggles, and economic opportunity all played a part. Merchants pursued trade, nobles sought new lands, and leaders often acted out of calculation as much as piety. Relations between Christians and Muslims were not defined solely by hostility. They also included diplomacy, alliances, and commerce. So, what can we take away from this 200-year-old history lesson? In Mill's view, the Crusades were no accident. They were the outcome of centuries of pilgrimage, faith, and grievance colliding with the pressure of Muslim expansion. And they were not just about recovering Jerusalem, but also about protecting Europe itself as a Christian land. For Mills, the Crusades were Europe's moral duty, a righteous convulsion that reshaped East and West alike. Modern historians may try to downplay the role played by faith and Christianity in preserving the independence of Europe, but it seems more likely that these wars were in fact a struggle to retain freedom against forces seeking to control those who did not share their Islamic doctrine. Indeed, the success of these crusades was likely essential to the development of modern Europe. The Renaissance, invention of the printing press and the resulting Protestant Reformation, the Age of Exploration and the resulting spread of Christianity, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, and ultimately the development of modern civilization itself. All of these things occurred because Europe retained its freedom. Looking at Europe today, one can't help but wonder what the heroic European warriors of the Crusades would think if they saw their homelands increasingly occupied by vast numbers of Muslim foreigners intent on spreading their doctrine. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this video. In future videos, we'll continue through Mill's history in Chapter 2, tracing how the First Crusade unfolded and how these wars of faith forever changed the medieval world and history itself. If you enjoy exploring rare books, forgotten histories, and the voices of past historians, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more. There's much more to uncover inside Charles Mills' History of the Crusades. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.